Hello everyone. My name is Hilman from Serp API. Today we are going to see how to work with Assistants API by OpenAI to create our own AI assistants that can remember users' conversations. What is actually Assistants API? Assistants API is a new API by OpenAI that allows us to build our own AI assistants programmatically. So it's something you can build and use on your own application. We don't need to use ChatGPT to use this program. It can remember users' conversation. We can expand its knowledge by providing more data either through PDF files or external API. Next question is, what's the difference between the Assistants API and the chat completion method? So the chat completion method is a standalone function. It doesn't have the previous context of our conversation with the AI. So previously, we have to build our custom solution for our chat or assistance application, so they can always have the previous context from the previous conversation. While with the Assistants API, this feature is already built in. So our program will always understand the context and make it unique for each of the users who use our program. So here is the assistant example that I'll build for this tutorial. It's a marketing assistant that can give people advice regarding marketing's problem. First, we need to create a thread. We need the thread ID to start a conversation. This is like the unique identifier for each of the conversation. Now I'll hit another endpoint. This endpoint will simulate when we are sending a message to the assistants. For example, I'm going to introduce myself with a name and what my business is. And at the same time, I'd like to show you that I can create another thread. So this is a different thread from previous one. Now I'm going to run a separate thread with a different message. This time I'm introducing a different person with a different business. Now back to our first message. So this is the message that we sent originally, and this is the response from the AI assistants. As you can see, the assistant gives us solid advice regarding running marketing for specific to our business. Now I'd like to show you, what if I'm sending another message without the name and my business context. I'm just asking the assistant generally to give me an example for on-page SEO. So remember, my name is Alex and I'm running a pet online shop. Now as you can see, this thread remember that my name is Alex, and it also remember that I'm running pet online shop. You can see based on the reply. So this is not a general advice, but it's tailored specific to my needs, which is based on my previous conversation. Now I'm switching to the other thread. After I'm introducing myself that I run a coffee shop, I'm going to give the assistant a different context that I'm from Indonesia, a simple message like that. Let's see. And as you can see here, the assistant remember that I am running a coffee shop. Then it's also share some strategies that I can use for running my coffee shop in Indonesia. So as you can see, by using a different thread ID, I'm able to create separate and unique conversation. So this is what Assistants API is. This is how assistants work. So we will create an assistant. We give a specific instruction to the assistant. For example, it's a personal finance bot, or from our previous example, it was a marketing assistant. So you can create any assistant you want. Each assistant can have many threads. Thread is a conversation between the assistant and the user. So we can create multiple threads to make sure that we have a unique conversation between each of the user and the assistant. And this thread can have many messages, and we run this message as well as other method through the run method. The run will have several steps to it, like when it's currently in progress, it's currently running, or it's already completed. So we will see how each of these objects in the code. So here is the step-by-step how we can make our own assistants. First, we can create an assistant through code or through assistants dashboard in platform.openai.com. If your program needs to create multiple assistants, then I suggest to create the assistant programmatically by using this method openai.beta.assistants.create like this. But since I will only need one assistant in this demo, I will create the assistant through the playground. Click create. Now we give it a name. I'll call it marketing assistant, and I will give a specific instruction what this assistant should do or capable of doing. We can also choose which model we want to use. GPT 3.5 will be sufficient for this example. We can also add functions. We can also enable code interpreter, so our assistants can understand and run code. And also we can upload custom knowledge by adding files here. But for now, I'll keep the simple instruction like this, and I can close it. Now we have the assistance ID. You can put the assistant ID on your environment file along with the OpenAI API key. So I already have two important keys here. Since this will be static or constant, I'll put it on NV, but feel free to edit directly on your code as well. Now let's see how the code looks like. So here I'm declaring the .env package. I'm using the OpenAI for Node.js, and I'm also using Express to easily create the endpoint, and I'm importing the two keys that I just showed you before. We set up an Express. We also set up an OpenAI client by attaching the API key. Now I'm assigning the assistant ID here, so you can also paste your assistant ID here. Let's ignore this for now. Let's move to the root section. Remember, I'm using Express, so I'm running the server here, and I have two simple endpoints here. First, a get method to the thread endpoint. The method will create a thread for us. So let's see how the create thread method. We simply call the OpenAI function .beta.threads.create, and it will return the thread. This endpoint will just return the thread.id. So let's try to run this server. Now let's try to hit this endpoint on Postman. As you can see, it just returned a thread ID with a unique thread ID that we can use for our conversations. Now to the second endpoint is to send a new message. So you can imagine this endpoint will be hit by our chat application on the front end, where we use a post method to the message endpoint. We need two parameters. First one is the thread ID. So the flow will be like after hitting the thread, when user opening the chat box for the first time or opening a conversation for the first time, we will hit the thread endpoint, and the thread ID will be saved either in the browser or our application level. And now we can send the message that user typed alongside with the thread ID that we saved previously. This endpoint will run an add message method. Let's see what the add message looks like. We are calling the OpenAI.beta.threads.message and create the message based on the thread ID, and we are giving it role user and attaching the message. And we will just return our response from this method. Now back to our message. After creating the message, now we will run the Assistants API. So it's not enough if we just adding the message to the thread, but we also need to run the assistants. We will run the assistant by using this custom function, which called run assistant. We are using the thread ID to run the thread. So in this method, we are not sending the message anymore because we already add or stack the message previously to this thread. So we'll just tell the OpenAI, please run the assistant and this thread ID. We will send the thread ID and the assistant ID. And the runs method itself actually have an instruction method that we can give to the assistant, but please be careful because you can override the original instruction that we gave when we initially created the assistant. And here again, I'm just returning the response after running the thread. Now let's get back to the message endpoint. So after running the thread, now I have the run ID. So the run ID is also unique. Now, here's the important part. We cannot just simply return the response from the run ID. The reason for this is because the run objects have a life cycle. So it could have multiple status. It could be still in progress, or maybe it requires an action, like running an external API when we are using function calling, or it is cancelled, or it's completed. So there are multiple status our run life cycle could have. That's why I have to check the status by running an interval here. That's why you initially see the polyinterval variable here, so I can run it globally. Here, I'm checking the status by running an interval method in JavaScript and checking it per 5 seconds. You can adjust the time, of course. And I'm running a method called checking status, where I'm attaching the response so I can return the response immediately when it's finished. I also shared the thread ID as well as the run ID. Let's see what's the checking status method look like. So here we will retrieve the runs object based on the thread ID on the run ID. Remember, the run object can have multiple ID as well. So here we are always checking the run status. You can console if you want to see the details. And in this example, I'm only interested when it's completed. That's why I'm adding a conditional statement here. If the status is completed, then I will clear the interval or stop the checking status program, and I will get the message list added to this variable and looping the message list into this message variable to get the content and return the messages. You can also just take the last messages depend on your use case. So in this method, you could have multiple conditional statement depend on what you are going to do. But again, in this example, I'm just going to simulate if the status is completed, I want to return the message. So that's the structure of our method. I run it once again. So if people hit the message, we will run the add message to create the message and then run the assistant and checking the status of this run ID. So that's it. Let's see the program once again. I'm creating a thread ID here. Now I'm going to attach the thread ID and you can introduce yourself. For example, I run a software. While waiting for the response, I can create another thread to create a separate conversations hitting the same endpoint. But for different thread ID, I'm Alex, I own a rocket company. Send a message. Let's check our previews if it's completed. We can also check the console. So here, as you can see, this is what the run object looks like when it's running. You can always check the status since I'm printing the run and the current status. So when it's loading, it's always in progress until it's completed, and we can get the response that we want. So here's the sample response. They directly give us some content marketing idea. Let's send another message, but to the same thread ID. Let's ask for specific points here. For example, the point content marketing, how to do the third strategy. I'm just going to refer to what the assistants previously shared with me. Now let's back to the other thread. Rocket Groups exciting. What specific marketing challenge are you facing right now? Let's say Alex don't really know about the business, so let's just say how to make money. And let's back to the previous conversation. As you can see, the assistant know I was referring to the third point, which is content marketing. So the assistant now shared more detail regarding the content marketing for my software agency. Back to our rocket business, how to make money. Then assistants know that we are running a rocket company based on our previous conversation, not a software agency. So we can have as many conversations as we want, and each of the conversation will be unique to the assistants. That's it. Hope you like it. Feel free to ask if you have any questions. See you in the next video.